The rain had been falling all evening, beating steadily against the tinted glass of the Johnsons' black luxury car. Inside, silence filled the air like a suffocating fog. Emily Johnson sat in the back seat, clutching her small suitcase so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her throat raw from begging, but nothing had softened her parents' hearts. They hadn't spoken to her since leaving the mansion, not a word of comfort or reassurance, just cold stares fixed on the road. At 19, Emily was old enough to understand exactly what was happening. She wasn't being taken to college. She wasn't being taken on a trip. She was being discarded, punished for being who she was. Punished for not fitting into the flawless image her parents worked so hard to present to the world. She stared at her reflection in the window, her face pale and streaked with tears, her body rounder than the girls she grew up with. She had been called names all her life, lazy, spoiled, fat. But nothing hurt more than the quiet disappointment in her parents' eyes whenever they looked at her. For the Johnsons, appearances were everything. Their mansion was the pride of the neighborhood, their cars polished to perfection, their names whispered with respect at every gala. But Emily was their flaw. While other daughters dazzled in designer gowns, Emily wore dresses that always seemed too tight, too plain. While other daughters posed for photographs with perfect smiles, Emily stood awkwardly in the background, hiding her body. She had grown up with wealth, but never with acceptance. Every meal was a lecture, every family event a test she always failed. The breaking point came 2 nights earlier. Her mother had ordered her to attend another gala, insisting she wear a glittering gown that made her feel trapped in her own skin. Emily had refused. For the first time, she said no. Her father's face turned crimson with anger, her mother's eyes narrowed in disgust. They accused her of rebellion, of disrespect, of humiliating them. And then they decided, she would be sent away. Not to boarding school, not to relatives, but to Thomas Green, the man everyone in town whispered about. The poor farmer, the one who lived in a crumbling house, drove an ancient truck, and bought second-hand clothes from thrift stores. Sending her there, they believed, would teach her humility, discipline, and shame. It would break her stubbornness and force her into obedience. The car pulled to a stop on a dirt road, mud splashing under the tires. Emily lifted her tear-filled eyes. Before her stood a small wooden farmhouse, its paint peeling, its roof patched with tin. A dim light flickered in the window. Chickens clucked in the yard, and the smell of soil and animals filled the damp air. Emily's heart sank. Her life of comfort, of silk sheets and warm baths, was over. A tall man stepped out of the shadows. Thomas Green wore a faded shirt tucked into old jeans, his boots caked with mud. His face was weathered, his hands rough, but his eyes were calm, steady, and strangely kind. He said nothing as Emily's father handed him the suitcase. There was no farewell, no embrace, not even a glance back as her parents drove away, their car vanishing into the rain-soaked night. Emily stood frozen, abandoned like unwanted baggage. "Come inside," Thomas said quietly, his voice deep but gentle. She followed him into the farmhouse. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet, the air smelled faintly of smoke and fresh bread, and the only light came from a flickering oil lamp. The furniture was simple, handmade, worn but sturdy. It was nothing like the marble floors and crystal chandeliers she had grown up with. Thomas pointed to a small room with a narrow bed. "You can sleep there," he said, before retreating to his own room. Emily sat on the bed, clutching her suitcase, tears streaming silently as she stared at the wooden ceiling. She had never felt so small, so unwanted, so lost. The first morning came harshly. At dawn, the crowing of roosters pulled her from restless sleep. Thomas handed her a bucket. "Water from the well," he said simply. She staggered outside, the bucket heavier than she imagined. Halfway back, her arms gave out, and water splashed all over her dress. She burst into tears, expecting anger, ridicule, something. But Thomas only took the bucket gently from her hands and said, "It happens. Try again tomorrow." Later, he asked her to help carry baskets of vegetables from the garden. She tried, but her legs wobbled, and the basket slipped. She braced herself for insults. Instead, Thomas quietly bent down, lifted the basket with her, and together they carried it inside. At night, She sat by the fireplace, ashamed of her weakness, but Thomas never scolded her. He spoke little, but his silence carried no judgment. The days passed slowly, each one filled with tasks she had never done before: feeding chickens, kneading dough, pulling weeds, hauling hay. Her body ached constantly, her hands blistered, her clothes stained with dirt. Yet with each sunrise, something inside her began to shift. She stopped expecting laughter when she stumbled, stopped waiting for cruel words when she failed. Instead, she found herself listening to the sounds of the farm, the wind sweeping through the fields, the laughter of children in the distance, the soft mooing of cows in the barn. For the first time in her life, no one was watching her, judging her, or comparing her to anyone else. One afternoon, she wandered farther than usual. Expecting the farmland to end, she was stunned to find it stretching endlessly in every direction. Golden fields of wheat swayed in the breeze, rows of corn stretched tall and proud, orchards hung heavy with fruit. It seemed to go on forever. When Thomas appeared behind her, she asked in awe, "Do all these belong to you?" He nodded. "Yes, every acre. But everyone says you're poor," Emily whispered. Thomas chuckled softly, his eyes on the horizon. "People see what they want to see. They see my old truck, my clothes, my house. They think wealth is in shiny things. But real wealth is here. The land feeds me, sustains me, and it will outlast every fancy car, every mansion. I own thousands of acres. But I don't live to prove myself. I live to live." Emily stared at him, stunned. The man mocked as poor was richer than anyone she knew. Yet he chose simplicity, contentment, honesty. Her entire world, built on appearances and status, suddenly seemed shallow and meaningless. As weeks turned into months, Emily transformed. Her body grew stronger, her movements surer. She no longer flinched when she saw her reflection in the window. The roundness of her body no longer felt like shame, it was hers, and it was strong. She found joy in small victories: carrying a full basket without stumbling, baking bread that rose perfectly, planting seeds that sprouted under her care. She laughed more, a sound that surprised even her. Sometimes, when Thomas heard her laughter, a faint smile would cross his lips, though he never said much. Emily began to see Thomas differently too. Beneath his quiet exterior was wisdom, patience, and kindness that outshone any wealth her parents flaunted. He never treated her as a burden or a punishment. To him, she was simply Emily, a person, not a failure, not an embarrassment, not a shame. The day her parents returned, they expected to find a broken daughter begging to come home. Instead, they found a young woman standing tall, her face glowing with health and confidence. Her father's eyes widened in disbelief, her mother's lips pursed in confusion. "Pack your things," her father ordered. "You're coming home." Emily looked at them calmly. "No," she said. Her mother gasped. Her father's face reddened. But Emily did not waver. "You thought this was punishment. You thought sending me here would break me. But it saved me. I found myself here. You tried to shame me, but instead, you gave me freedom." Her parents were speechless. They left in silence, unable to understand the daughter they no longer controlled. Emily stayed on the farm, not because she was forced, but because she wanted to. For the first time in her life, she had a choice, and she chose peace. She chose honesty. She chose herself. The girl once mocked for her size became a woman who carried her own light. The farmer once ridiculed for poverty remained the quiet master of thousands of acres, living humbly on his own terms. Together, they proved that appearances mean nothing. True worth is not in what the world sees, but in what the heart knows.